Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. So as an introduction, I'm Elaine Chang. I'm the Director of Market Development and Customer Success for TaroWorks, and we're super excited for today's session. So just by way of introduction, at TaroWorks, we work with lots of socially minded organizations who provide innovative products and services to people all over the world, including some of the hardest to reach areas. So with such widespread operations, it's the frontline staff who are really spreading the word, delivering this impact. And this frontline staff is oftentimes the sales team. So in general, building and supporting a sales team can be challenging enough, and even more so when you're working in these remote environments and you're not in constant contact with them. So I'm joined today by a superstar group of people who can help you think through how to identify where your sales team can improve and how to equip them with technology, especially in these areas that you're all working in. So we're excited to be joined today by Scott Roy from Whitten Roy Partnership, which is a sales consultancy focused on transforming sales teams for socially minded organizations. And we also have Michel Doguet and Gordon Lau from IDE, which is a global nonprofit using market-based approaches to combat poverty. So they have sales teams all over the world delivering products ranging from latrines, farm inputs, to water filters. And if you don't know me, I'm Elaine Chang with TaroWorks, and TaroWorks is an offline mobile field services app that's connected to Salesforce.com and helps organizations manage their remote field activities and their data. So together, we'll be sharing what common mistakes are being made as people build their sales teams, how to think about equipping your sales team with technology, and then we'll be hearing about how IDE put this all together to build their sales team and added technology to transform their latrine sales in Cambodia. So before I pass it off to Scott, I have a couple housekeeping rules to go over. Number one is that this session is being recorded, and we'll be recapping and posting recording on our blog, where you can also find past webinar topics. Everybody is on mute by default. If you have a question, please type it into the Q&A window or raise your hand. What we'll try to do with the questions is save most of them for the end. If you do have an urgent clarification question throughout the presentation, please type that in and I'll get that clarified. So with that, let me pass it over to Scott.
Great, thanks Elaine, and good evening everybody. It's evening here in Cambodia, and really happy to actually be out here working with the IDE WASH team. We've had a relationship with WASH for I think 7 years now. This is going in our 7th year of consultation with them in various forms, and I'm just delighted to be able to be here to share with you some of the learnings we've had. I'm going to go to the first slide and just want to talk a little bit about some of the common mistakes that we see in building sales teams. In our work, and last year, for example, we worked in 23 developing countries across the world, many in Africa, and mostly in Africa, and then in Latin America, and also in Southern and Southeast Asia. One of the most important mistakes oftentimes that's made is just recruiting the wrong people. And this is one of the things that we get asked all the time as sales consultants. How can we find the right people to work with? And quite frankly, oftentimes what people are looking for are people with experience in sales. And what we find is that actually it's not always the best person to bring in. I mean, one of the questions you got to ask yourself is, why are they looking for a job to begin with? Because people who are good at sales typically already have a job and they're pretty happy with it and they're doing pretty well with it. And it's not completely always true, but it's oftentimes true. And oftentimes the people who you're recruiting come from, especially in developing countries, a fast-moving consumer goods background oftentimes. And quite frankly, many of the types of products and services that are being sold through marketing efforts in the developing world are behavioral change type products, not simply fast moving consumer goods. So when you're selling a behavioral goods product, you're talking about a very different kind of sales construct, the type of approach that is going to be taken with customers. So it's the kind of thing where you almost have to end up breaking bad habits in order to train people how to sell your product in the right way so that they actually end up using it. So for example, in the latrine industry, you don't want to see just sales made quickly where people just put them in their backyard and didn't know you use them because they weren't sold properly. So recruiting the right people, we find, are people who really want to learn. They're eager to learn, and they may be quiet, they might be talkative, they may be very just average people who have just a moment, please. Yeah, there you go. Someone was calling me. Bad time to have your phone on. So we look for people who are eager to learn and who want to learn, how to serve and how to actually sell the product that you're wanting to put on the market. The second thing, it sort of relates to the first one, and that is that oftentimes we find the wrong strategy is employed to sell behavior change products. What ends up happening is oftentimes product innovations are so amazing, like in the solar industry or in cook stoves, et cetera. A lot of really smart people have invented really great products that have literally changed the lives of millions of people across the planet. And sometimes you get so infatuated with the technology and the amazing things that these products do that the type of selling is how do I convince people of these amazing features and benefits that this product or these products do. And actually, the way you want to sell a behavioral change product is to engage people in a conversation about the problems, the very specific problem sets that these products address, and engage deeply in a conversation with them about what those problems mean to them and what are some of the challenges those problems present, and eventually what is it costing them financially. So for example, if you're selling latrines in Cambodia, what are some of the problems people encounter with open defecation? And so it can be the inconvenience, it can be the embarrassment, it can be the threat of snake bites, or it can be the threat of violence, or it can be just the threat of illness, etc. So we find that for behavioral change type products, it's extremely important to be able to engage deeply in the problem and then do a cost calculation to find out how much it's actually costing them. And then following on the heels of that, another common mistake is we find that the training for salespeople and managers is often really insufficient. Oftentimes, I'm thinking of one very large client. I won't say the name, obviously, but one very, very large client you would know the name of, and they said, "Oh, our sales training is fantastic." And when I got in there to take a look at their sales training, it really was about 90% about the product and the features and benefits of the product, and very little about how to actually communicate effectively with clients, how to approach them, how to organize your day, how to use names, how to close the sale. Those things weren't even discussed at all. So oftentimes the sales training is here, let me explain how the product works, and then you go explain to other people, and good luck, And as far as management is concerned, this is one of the areas that I'm even more concerned with now as a consultant is, how can we really improve the quality of management in the field? Because those managers play such a very big role in the happiness of salespeople and also the development of salespeople. And and that really leads to that next point, which is organizations oftentimes really fail to develop the salespeople they have on their team. They may want them to get better, but there's really no ongoing training really specifically to help address individual problems that each salesperson has. So not all salespeople are going to have the same set of problems or same problem in particular. And that's why management is so important, to be able to get in, listen to people, watch them work, individualize their understanding of the situation, and then give really good, sharp advice about how people can improve, practice with them, role play, and even show them by, monkey see, monkey do. We always used to say that back in the direct sales business. I've been in direct sales for nearly 40 years now myself, and I've revealed my age. But but basically, it's something where if you as a manager can demonstrate the product in the way that you want the other person to see it, or demonstrate how you approach a client, or demonstrate how you get referrals, then it's much easier for that agent to then imitate you and to gain confidence that they can do the same thing too. And then one of the key things as well is just the use of territory. I mean, it's amazing to me how poorly territory is actually utilized, because a lot of times people will go cruising through a territory, they grab all the low-hanging fruit, and they move on to the next territory, believing that there are really no other sales to make in the original territory. And nothing could be further from the truth. Actually, if they could stay in that territory and use names of the people that they have sold to, and then then get referrals in that area, and see brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and best friends and this kind of thing, then names beget names and beget confidence for the salesperson and for the buyer. And this is how you penetrate a territory. It's very, very important. And last but not least is just data. It's just very poor data management, not only from the collecting of it, but really the what data you're collecting. I mean, the actual use of that data, et cetera. And so on the next slide, I want to talk a bit more about that, and because this is something that is really, really important in building a great sales organization. Is, first of all, oftentimes people, when I say poor data management, is they have too narrow a purpose for the data. It's oftentimes designed for management to know what's going on at the field level, so that they can have visibility of that. But actually, the data that's created by the salesperson is really valuable to that salesperson. And so we really strongly believe in the feedback loop on a daily basis. Back when I first learned how to sell many, many years ago, is we were taught how to keep on a 3x5 card, 3 inches by 5 inches card, the number of, well, first of all, the time I started my day and the time I stopped my day, and the number of sales calls, that means the number of times I knocked on a door, the number of demonstrations I made, the number of sales I made, and the size of those sales that I made. And I used to keep meticulous records about that. And then my sales manager taught me actually how to look at those numbers, especially the input numbers, because that told the story of where I was not succeeding as a salesperson, more so than just how many did you sell today. And so many clients we work with really are very interested in what's being sold, which I completely agree with. That is what you're trying to do, is because you're trying to have impact. But what you also have to do is collect the kind of data that can help your sales team improve. And so that's what I mean by not enough of the right data collected. We've got to not only collect data for not just management, but for the people who are on the field, at the field, and share it with them. But we want to make sure we have the right data and we know how to interpret that data. And focusing on the wrong data, which is like if you have a new salesperson, the last thing you want to do is say, well, how many did you sell today? Because oftentimes salespeople are not that good at first. It's not always true, but a lot of times they're not that good at first. And so when they say, "Oh, I only sold 0," or "I sold 1," and then the sales manager has a reaction to that of going, "Oh my God, I mean, you could have done so much better. What happened? Why did you only sell that much?" Then that really impacts attitude. And as we all know on the phone, if you're involved with any kind of sales of anything, is that attitude is king in determining how well a salesperson is actually going to do. And so it's important to focus on the right data. And then also, this is another one too, is misuse of data and using it to reprimand salespeople, which you don't want to do that at all. You want to use it in a way, it's like sometimes people will say, well, Scott, why do you want to collect the number of sales calls you make and the number of presentations? Because people are just going to lie to you. And I say to them, well, yeah, probably some people are going to lie to you, but most people are not. And the deal is that if you have decided that your salespeople need to go out and let's say their goal is to get 15 demonstrations per day, and someone comes in with 7, and then you jump on them and you say, why didn't you get 15 in today? Or your sales manager does that. Then what ends up happening is from that point forward, that salesperson will always have 15 demonstrations. And that's because management mismanaged that data. They said the wrong things and did the wrong things with that salesperson. So it's very important to manage your attitude when looking at that data, so you don't just use it to reprimand people. And the last point I want to make is that manual systems are really cumbersome. That's that stack of paper on the right-hand side. People, I know organizations collect tons and tons of data that then they don't always know what to do with it. So, so what we'd like to do now, I'm going to pass this back over to Elaine, and so she can talk a little bit about the considerations of how technology can be used for the salesperson and what kind of things you want to be thinking about. Elaine, over to you.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, great. So really great segue into the section about technology. So that's perfect. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the considerations for choosing technology for the salesperson. So this is how to equip your sales team with to help them with their job. And I want to break down that title a little bit. So technology for the salesperson. So before choosing technology, it's essential to first know what the goals and operations of the sales team are, especially those operations. I think technology should really aid existing practices, which is why the work of Whitten Roy is so important. I think a lot of times people come to us and say, well, we don't have the right processes, we need a technology to do that. And unfortunately, technology doesn't bring the processes, but you should look for tools that enhance the processes that you and your sales team already have or are establishing. And that's why we always review business processes before engaging about our product. So what you're seeing in this photo is a client of ours who sells solar lamps. And they already had sales processes in place for the entrepreneurs to sell their lamps and log invoices. So when they switched to TaroWorks, they wanted a tool so their existing invoice processes went digital. So it was still their process, but it just helped things go faster, got them better, more accurate data. And so here we see Aaron, who's our trainer, filling out the last paper invoice for Solar Sister before they went digital. And then I also want to focus on kind of the salesperson. So it should be the tool should be personalized for each salesperson so they have access to their own relevant information. If they just have access to everything, it doesn't necessarily help them in their day-to-day with their specific clients. So yeah, I think the technology for the salesperson to really benefit needs to be very personalized. So let me go into some of these considerations here. I think firstly, we have to understand what is a salesperson's role. And it seems simple, but I think a lot of people come to us saying, we have a sales team and I want them to collect data. And I think it's really important to kind of clarify that a salesperson is not a survey enumerator. They're not just there to collect data. They're building the relationship between your organization and your customers. They're the front lines. So they're not there for kind of data extraction. It's really how do you use data to help them and in turn help the organization. So I think a note about what CRMs are, because it's particularly relevant, and I think maybe some of you have seen the term, but maybe not known what it is. I think it's particularly relevant for a salesperson's job because it stands for customer relationship management. So each touch point from your team with your customer is an opportunity to build that relationship. And a CRM system manages all of that. And the reason it's important to manage the relationship instead of just a one-time transaction is because better relationships lead to better adoption of your services or tool, increases your word of mouth, and hopefully your end impact. An example that I always use is sort of imagine placing an order for cable and the cable guy comes. You'd expect them to know who you are, what the order was for, because you already have a relationship with them. But in a lot of the case that we talk to, every form starts off with, what is your name? What is your date of birth? Like, it's just going over some of the things that people really should know if you have an ongoing relationship. Okay, and I think something that Scott touched on also is kind of when thinking about the technology to empower your sales team, consider what will make them successful, not just about what data you need. A lot of the time, it's not a data collection tool, but you really need that CRM tool or a field service app that can help guide them in their day-to-day tasks. And using these types of apps, data about activities should just fall out naturally, as Scott mentioned as well. So if you're tracking like sales per month or number of female clients, how much time is being spent on a sales call, how many attempts are done before a sale takes place. As field agents or salespeople are logging these services into their app, they should, like, this data should just fall out. It shouldn't be kind of an accounting exercise and like looking back over the last month, how many women did you reach out to? No one's going to remember that. So it's just a matter of like, how do you collect information as you're going so that management can kind of view those metrics and suggest improvements. Okay, so go to several ways that the tools can guide this idea of guiding day-to-day tasks, several ways that tools should guide your sales team. So the first one is providing guidance on what tasks need to be done and what to do. So this idea of having standard operating procedures. Sales teams are performing many things when they're in the field. Sometimes they're registering, sometimes they're giving a demo, giving trainings, doing assessments, or taking credit ratings, actually logging the sale. So the tools should be responsive to all of the wide range of tasks that are part of their job. And then finally, also in terms of guidance, is giving access to important data. So giving information about current statuses, how they compare with the rest of the team. So here there's access to information about, I guess what you're seeing in the graphic is when you deal with just a data collection app, these salespeople are just logging information and it's going into a black hole. They don't have any feedback about how they're doing, about how their relationships are progressing. And so a tool that's really built for salespeople will allow them to access information about their personalized relationships, the histories, where things are with each client. What kind of tasks do they need to do? And on top of all of this, being able to access all of that offline. So I think those are just a couple of the considerations that we've seen really lead to success. So at this point, let's take a look at how IDE has put this into practice. So let me switch this back to Scott. Scott, I think you might be on mute if you're speaking.
Of course, I was. Thanks. So I've got the pleasure of sharing with you some of the highlights about IDE Cambodia's SMSU or Sanitation Marketing Scale-Up Program. Basically, the sanitation marketing is in 7 provinces. It's been going on since 2009 when the pilot started. Over 1 million households live in this catchment area, so about 5 million people, or roughly 40% of all of the population of Cambodia. And at the time the program started, only 280,000, had latrines. and so about 28%. And so really significant challenge, in increasing the amount of coverage. This is when the IDE program was started, and they innovated with something called the Easy Latrine, which was bringing together the cement, the rings, the ceramic pan, the chamber box, the plastic piping, etc., all together into one package. Prior to that, people had to go out and pull these pieces together, and it was just so difficult to do that over bad roads in Cambodia, etc., that people just literally didn't build latrines. And so IDE's innovation was that they created the sanitation marketing approach where they brought together this one particular product called the Easy Latrine. And the sales agents were hired, and they sell to consumers through individual sales presentations. They started off with group presentations, and then as the program progressed, they've gone into individual sales presentations that have increased penetration. And basically, they use local concrete producers to manufacture the latrines. And so I wanted to tell you, when we started working with IDE Cambodia, we found some problems that they had encountered during their primary pilot period. During the pilot period, they had sold about 15,000 latrines, so they were very successful at that. And then they had gotten funding to scale up. And so one of the things we found immediately when we came in and did our discovery work, like we do with all of our clients, is we came in and we found out that really they were recruiting a lot of the wrong people. Some of the things that I was saying before, they were hiring people who were just basically fast-moving consumer goods people. They also were hiring a lot of village chiefs and governmental officials who wanted the position, they wanted to make money, but they really weren't wanting to work very hard. And so therefore it was sort of hit or miss with the people that they had recruited. And also the style of selling was just a product pitch style, which is what we see everywhere. And essentially it's what everyone thinks about sales, or what most people think about sales, I should say, to be speaking more accurately, is that most people think selling is really pitching people on an idea and convincing them to buy it, even if it's not something they really want. It's like the old expression of selling ice cubes to Eskimos, and nothing is further from the truth about what really good selling is all about. It's actually quite different than that. And along with that were poorly developed sales methods, and quite frankly, people weren't taught how to approach customers or work the territory or close sales or answer objections. And in fact, if that doesn't happen, if you don't professionally teach or teach people a methodology that that actually works, then they're going to make up their own. And unfortunately, what they oftentimes make up under the pressure of trying to make a commission, because many of them aren't paid a salary, oftentimes people will resort to coercive tactics, arm twisting, etc., misrepresenting the product, saying things that aren't true about the product, etc. And so then all of a sudden, well-meaning NGOs and social enterprises wake up one day with a black eye, wondering what happened to our organization. How did our people start selling this way? It doesn't happen all the time, but oftentimes it does. And then undeveloped management practices. Again, managers' job is to make sure that the products go in the ground, that sales are being made. And when goals are not being hit, targets aren't being hit, oftentimes upper management will lean on them to say, what's going on, get the results done. And so then they'll in turn lean on the salespeople. And so they just sort of pass the pain on down. They're really not trying to develop their sales teams. They're just trying to squeeze production out of them. And that's one of the main reasons why turnover is so high in direct sales forces, particularly commission sales forces. And also something else we saw was they just lacked the data. They just lacked any sort of input data. They hadn't even thought about collecting input data. All they were looking at was the output data. And so what we did is we began working with them, and we, from 2011 to 2014, we helped them improve the recruiting skills and the people they were actually attracting to the program. They stopped going after experienced salespeople and started wanting to attract people who could learn how to sell and wanted to learn how to sell. We introduced behavioral change sales methodology, which is essentially what I said earlier, and that is, instead of pitching the product, what they do is they really listen deeply to the problems that people have about, for example, in this case, latrines, and what do people do if they don't have a latrine? How do they use the toilet? Oh, that's what you do. And well, tell me about some of the inconveniences you experience with that situation. And so we got in there and designed a methodology and built what we call a site seller. You can see in the image right there, an agent. I just took this picture the other day, actually, when I was in the field. And this agent is sharing with this woman and her family a storybook, essentially, which helps tell the story and describes what are some of the challenges that people have. And that helps to support that problem-led conversation before you actually get into showing something that's going to solve the problem, which is the product. We also worked on incentivizing the sales performance with appropriate commissions and bonuses. In this case, they were selling a $37 toilet, and they were giving direct sales commission salespeople 50 cents, the equivalent of 50 cents of commission, and they were paying their own expenses. It simply wasn't enough money. And so we immediately came to the client and said, you're going to need to increase the commissions because you're going to keep having people turn over otherwise. And so they listened to us, and unfortunately, as one of the ways in order to do that, you need to increase by $5. And they thought, oh my God, if we do that, people will stop buying it. And that's one of the things that we have to fight in the developing world, because we simply believe that people can't, they're very poor people and they can't afford a few extra dollars. But those few extra dollars make such a huge difference. If you can pay your people properly, it's going to keep them engaged and it's going to keep them excited about what they're doing. And it really drove performance. We also introduced an input collection system and dashboard. This is pre-TaroWorks. This was actually building the system like Elaine was talking about. We actually built the system, and then TaroWorks came in and then put the technology behind it to make it easier to use. And in fact, dramatically easier to use. I remember being in the interviews with Stu Taylor from IDE as they were designing this, and it was really very user-centric, very, very exciting. But at first, we just used a paper system until basically 2016. And essentially, SMSU1 built, managed a dispersed supply chain of over 200 individual concrete contractors. It was very, very challenging. And, oftentimes we ran into some, problems with, as you'll hear in a few minutes, about load balancing. And that is that we would put orders in, and you don't produce a concrete toilet overnight. Days. And so if you get a big backlog, it can create real problems for your customers. So those were some of the things we did in SMSU 1.0 all the way through 2014. And then late in 2014 all the way through now is what we call Sanitation Marketing Scale Up 2.0, which is the second phase of this program. A lot went right in phase one. Quite frankly, it was an amazing project and achieved double the sales goal. The sales goal originally was 70,000 units. And, it just was blown away. These guys just did an amazing job and sold over 140,000 toilets in 3 years. And it's often said that that's a toilet world record in sanitation marketing, which I think still stands today. But still, SMSU2 needed to solve various challenges and problems. One of them was selling into a maturing market. They were already up to about 50% coverage in the market. And so as you sell more and more into a fixed market, people aren't going to buy one latrine. Then the selling becomes harder. And what has happened as we've gone through this, now we're here in 2018, approaching 65%, 67% market saturation. The people that are left in the market, if you remember the Everett-Rogers curve, which is the bell curve of market saturation, or market adoption, I should say, is that we're definitely on that down slope into the late majority and especially the laggards. And this is where you get into the poor and the ultra poor and some of the more difficult people to sell to. And so you have to get very good with that. And then solving supply chain problems was another thing. Just how do you make sure that your supply chain can keep up with your sales? That's a hugely important question. And then finally, the big issue was collecting and assimilating data because it was so valuable. They really got the importance of data. And then of course we worked with TaroWorks, or ID worked with TaroWorks to solve that problem. So the achievements here in SMSU 2.0 is they built the SMSU Sales Academy to improve the quality of salesmanship and management. Michel, are you able to come online? Michel is having some technical difficulties tonight. He's the executive director of the WASH program here in Cambodia. Are you able to come on, Michel?
Yeah, I believe so. My mobile phone has not exploded yet, so I think.
Okay. I've just put up the slide of the achievements in SMSU 2.0 and the part about forming the supply team and load balancing, as well as introducing the technical solutions for data collection, sales management, and DMQ. So let me turn it over to you to talk about those.
Yes. Well, the first thing I think which transpired from your presentation, Scott, is that sales and its management and all the processes that goes around sales are really purely human process, and that there is no such a thing as sales automation and Salesforce automation. And during the first part of our program, SMSU 1, WRP has been really instrumental in shaping those human processes. Only then we could move on the next stage, which was having a better information system to support those human processes. And because there were some shortcomings in terms of data. For example, we used to set our sales target 20% higher than our delivery target. Why? Because empirically we noticed that we actually delivered less toilet than we sold toilet, which is a bit strange. But there were this 20% evaporation, which could come from maybe optimistic reporting from the sales team, or the supplier failing to record their deliveries, or customer canceling their order after it's been successfully closed. We didn't know. And so in SMSU 2, we wanted to have an information system. It was not about automating the sales process, but rather to be able to achieve traceability of what happened after sales is successful, and to be able to follow up with every individual order form and to know exactly what happened to those order forms, whether there is only two possible outcomes. Either an order form is delivered or it is not, it is cancelled. And that system has been implemented successfully with TaroWorks and Salesforce, and that created new real-time metrics that we could monitor, such our cancel rate measurement, a very important factor for our program. And this system sometimes reveals some very unsavory realities about the program. For example, we watched in Aurora at some point our cancel rate going to 40%, which was used. But from this point, it was measured, and we could act and try to understand the issue and reduce this cancel rate. Another good example is that we were able to measure very precisely what was the average time in days from the closed sale to the fulfillment of the toilet to the client. And the first time we made this measurement, we did find out that the fulfillment took about 30 days. Today, it's only 14 days, but we would not have been able to act on this fulfillment improvement without having the data in the first place. And all this data is, of course, fed back to the Salesforce for optimizing the sales process. For example, for the cancel rate, part of the problem was some closing step which were not properly followed, and some weak commitment from the household that we've been able to feed back to the sales team to improve our cancel rate. The last thing that we have implemented about a year ago, and my colleague Gordon will talk more about this, is we are not just tracking successful sales and order form. Now we have developed a keen interest in documenting unsuccessful sales. We call this dark matter questionnaires because it tells us a lot. It gives us invaluable market intelligence about the market we are not successful in servicing. And that's market intelligence is going to be invaluable for the third phase of the program. And I will hand over to you back from this point.
Thanks, Michel. And now it's I think we're going to hand this over to Gordon Lau.
Yes.
Elaine?
Gordon, you should be the presenter now.
I do have it indeed. Thank you very much, Elaine, Scott, and Michel. So, hello, I'm Gordon, and I'm the Information Systems Architect at IDE based in Denver. In this illustration, I'm the nerdy guy at the bottom left of the screen, and it's my job to design custom forms in TaroWorks that I could push into Android devices as jobs for our sales agents to do, even if they're offline at the time of the sale. And then to get that data back when they have connection and sync it into Salesforce, so that Michel's team and Scott's consultant can use that business analytics to drive higher sales. So here are some design considerations that you should take into account when building a sales system or contracting someone to build it for you. The prime directive really is a smooth sales experience. And you got to recognize that time is money. Your sales agent have a very particular set of skills that they've acquired over a long period of training and application, skills to understand the customer need and solve it with your products and services. So make sure that every question counts and is easy to understand, and help him or her to hit the next household that much quicker. Second, you want to complement the close and not distract from it. So what that means in our case is that the phone comes out only after the sales is closed, right? And for that to be technically exact, is after you get the money and the paper form is completed. So why do we use a paper form? The reason is that it acts as a receipt for a customer, and it also allows your sales agent then to enter information without holding the customer there on the spot. You want to respect their time. Third, use the tools at most. Squeeze every bit of functionality out of it. TaroWorks have features great and small, and when taken together, it makes the workflow that much faster and that much more accurate. So let me take you through a few screens for highlights. So I'm going to wear the hat of the sales agent now that I just finished the close. I got a sign order form or a thumbprint. I will start TaroWorks app even when I'm offline, and then the job starts with a drill down. And in this case, I'm restricted to the possible choices of the village of the territory that I have as a sales agent. And this really reduces typing and keep things simple. Now, there are various question types that you've seen in other places: text, numbers, dates. By the way, you probably noticed already that you can have any language you want as long as it has a Unicode font. I recommend adding photos. It's great for identification. It's also great for marketing. Pro tip, you can add in emojis to aid understanding for your agent so that they just understand exactly what they should do in that question. And finally, we have geolocation, which is definitely becoming increasingly useful for analysis. So then I would finish the form and sync when I had the connection, and that would create an order record in Salesforce. And that's why I call TaroWorks my Swiss Army knife. At this point then, the supply team can take over and assign batches of order to the best concrete worker available. That's the load balancing that Michel have alluded to earlier. But that's another presentation in and of itself. And we can include the link to that later if you wish. So there's a number of things that this team did extremely well when the tool can adapt and grow with the team. And I really want to highlight 4 things here. Right? First, using data to gain insight. the sales data on, who won how many orders in near real time obviously is very helpful. When you're considering sales manager who used to get that information over the phone or email that information in Excels after days and sometimes even weeks, right? So especially once our district sales leaders can see the data on the Salesforce Android app, they don't need to stop in the office, and then they can already be prepared for check-in of their sales team. They just need to open the Android Salesforce app and say, oh, okay, this is what my sales agent have done today. So with confidence in the data, Michelle's team can now roll out more precise incentive structures. The second thing is sales operation decentralization. So at first, things like SIM cards, setting up mobile phones, unpacking them, creating user accounts for each of these sales agents was centralized in Phnom Penh, which created a bottleneck and add a lot to a workload for someone who really had better things to do. So what they tried to do is they experimented with devolving it to the district level, and it worked really well. And the key to that success is because they have a mobile technology coordinator, Sita, who did an extremely great job at training and then monitoring, making sure things worked as planned. So we mentioned sales staff turnover, and they use device as a retention tool. So back when sales agents were commissioned and not staff, turnover was higher. So we made them an offer. For a particular term of service, they can buy the device at a discount when they leave. Now, aside from the obvious benefit, it also gave the team the liquidity to buy newer devices. And in fact, you also avoid the time spent on things like broken screens or cleaning up the device for the next person. And finally, they really did their job in discovering new data stories, right? Where else can they find important pieces of information? Where else can they add value? So as Michelle said, after 2 years after TaroWorks was initially deployed, they asked, what if we collect information on prospect, even if we could not close? So at the very least, the number of attempts given with numbers ordered gave us the closing rate, which is an extremely good measure of competency for sales agents and their managers. And that also adds another key insight to ask why they're not ready to place an order now. Oftentimes it's financial reason, but you also have other very key issues that you can address, such as challenging environments, product or service issues, right? Or maybe they already have a latrine. So these are type of things that you want to see that's hampering your sales. So we broke it down into those main objections and also collected more specific information. But most importantly, right, we asked if we can follow up and who we should follow up with. Because as the market gets more and more saturated, it is very critical to have this information to marshal our resources. So those are some key operation considerations when you want to deploy a mobile tool for your sales team. You do have to stick with it and iterate to see the return on investment. You do have to go out to look in the field and check for yourself. And now I purposefully did not go into our data structure because that really depends on your organization's need in a holistic sense. But I'm happy to answer those questions after the presentation. So with that, I'll pass the question back to you.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Gordon.
The screen for results.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. Thanks, Elaine. Yeah, just to sum up the the results of the IDE program and where they are today. You can see this mountain of sales that they've created over the last 9 years. You can see it started very slowly and then just skyrocketed. They've had over 300,000 sales, mostly cash paying. And in the future still, we have challenges ahead of us, but very exciting. Elaine, can you advance to the next one? And also the latrine coverage to date, which I think is really remarkable, is closing the gap from 28% to 65% latrine coverage just to date. And if you advance the next one as well, is that the SMSU 3, which is going to be starting this summer, aims to achieve 85 to 90% coverage over the next 5 years, which is absolutely remarkable. And so, Michelle, hats off to you and IDE and all the innovations that you've brought over, especially over the last 3 years with technology and the solutions you brought to help us find more customers. And Elaine, I'll pass it back to you.
Great, this is fantastic. Great work, everyone. So exciting to see. Great. So I think everyone's gotten a better understanding of a successful sales rollout. Please ask any questions in the question section or raise your hand and I can unmute you so you can ask the panelists. One thing to start things off is it was really striking to me how you know, the relationship doesn't end with the sale. Michelle, you mentioned how you're tracking things post-sale, so fulfillment. And I think that goes a long way in kind of word of mouth. So just curious, Scott, is there anything that you've noticed around how to increase word of mouth for sales? And then also for IDE, is there anything that you've put in place around increasing that?
And are you saying in word of mouth to be able to sell more customers in the field? Is that what you mean?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly, you know, as I was saying earlier, one of the biggest mistakes we see organizations make is they move too quickly through territory. And what basically we like to do is have organizations slow down and concentrate their efforts. You know, there's always this big sense of a gold rush. You know, I don't know why many organizations feel that way, is they need to run to the borders to stake their claim to an area. Quite frankly, and we see that a lot in the solar industry and the organizations we've worked with there. Quite frankly, you know, in the solar industry itself, the people who are going to win the day are going to be organizations that stay put in an area, drive stakes deep into that ground, and have references or referrals and stories and names, etc., that creates a web of relationships within a territory. And the tighter that territory is, the better those names are going to work. So definitely word of mouth, you know, passes a lot faster when there's a deeper penetration of a particular territory. Certainly one of the strategies we've used at IDE as well.
I'd like to add that word of mouth is also traveling much faster when the message is negative, usually. And so if there is a client insatisfaction, it's very, very quick in a rural environment that the negative word of mouth spread extremely fast, and that results in a massive cancellation. And again, I think the MIS raising the alarm on these post-sales cancellation when there is an uptick somewhere. It's very important to have real-time data in order to extinguish the fire of bad reputation due maybe to a supplier doing a poor job.
That's a great point.
Yeah, something that stuck out at me, Michelle, on that point is how you've decreased your fulfillment time from 30 to 14 days. Things like that will certainly help that satisfaction rate, I imagine.
Yes, that's was one of the many multi-layer cause for the peak in the cancel rate I was alluding to. Some of it was sales related, and some of it was fulfillment related. But the rule really is that once you get a measurement, you start to have a handle on the problem. Before, long delivery, long fulfillment time was an hypothesis, and one day it became a concrete piece of data. Only from there we could have a constructive talk with the team to improve that performance, that aspect of the program performance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think something else that stuck out to me is how I think a lot of people think of data as a way to log their successes, but it really should be a way to make decisions. And you've really shown that, because looking at that dark matter query, it's not necessarily a pretty picture, but that's how you start to manage it, is to understand it. So just great to see that happening.
Well, it's going to be such an important aspect of going forward into SMSU 3. It already is an important aspect. I know Michelle knows that, and it just is revealed to us just, exactly what we're dealing with. And, when you have the right questions in there, not just, why didn't you get it? Well, I can't afford it, but there are other reasons as well, that it really helps who your customers are, and where they're located, and what are the problems they're encountering there. So it helps you to really fine-tune your message, particularly when that pool of prospects really is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And so it's I think it's really going to serve us well going forward.
Right. One last thing that sort of stuck out at me was the use of incentives. So Gordon, you had mentioned some of the incentives around the devices. And I've also heard that from other organizations as well, kind of using a rent-to-own model so that they're kind of paying off the phone little by little, so that at the end they own it, and it's a reason for them to kind of keep it safe. So I think it's really fascinating to hear these different types of incentive structures coming about based on the actual devices too. So I just wanted to call that out and thought that was really interesting.
Actually, I have a small correction on this matter. We don't offer purchase of the smartphone when they leave. We offer this purchase much earlier than that. In fact, they can purchase their smartphone after having worked 3 months in the program or realize a certain amount of sales. We want them to acquire their smartphone as early as possible. Really, the last thing that any program wants to have is hundreds of portable devices on their asset register, because it's a nightmare to track, to maintain. They are theft, they are broken screen, and we want people to be owning their smartphone as soon as possible. But we do offer an important discount. I think it's 35 or 40%, so that it is very attractive, and indeed it serves as an incentive as well.
That's great. Okay, so I think that's it, unless there are other questions that I've missed. Okay, here's a question. Not sure who this might be for. How practically can pay-as-you-go solar players use such solutions? So I think I can take a first pass. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that I've worked with a number of solar companies that use it now. I mean, use that type of solution. In fact, one organization that I just spoke to last night for the first time we're considering working with, I asked them about, I'm assuming you have handheld devices and you collect data in that way, and they said no, actually we're really behind the 8 ball on that. So I when I think of a solar organization, I oftentimes think of the use of mobile devices and the application of this type of technology. But over to you, Elaine and Gordon, for the technical part of that.
Sure. I think with pay-as-you-go solar organizations, a lot of that is taking the sale, doing the initial lead qualifications, demonstrations. So a lot of the same steps need to happen in terms of relationship management. So in terms of tracking those things to make that sale, I don't see that as any different than if they were like biodigesters or latrines. Probably some differences, I'm sure, but I think in terms of the technology, that should work well. And also there's that inventory management piece. So maybe as you're logging your sales, you can see, well, okay, well, that means the warehouse is now down by 5, and it's kind of having that supply chain transparency as well will be important.
Definitely. There. Also, GPS location, especially with it. I mean, it's hard to move a 500-pound latrine, but it's easy to move a set of lights with a battery, you know.
Yeah. To add to what Elaine you said, right? The most important thing when you consider, be it pay-as-you-go solar or any other types of industry, is to think about your sales flow, and then think about what comes after that. In pay-as-you-go solar or any other type of installation-based system, you might need to take a number of steps. Okay, there's the steps where they express their interest. Then maybe you need to send someone out there and collect information. Oh, what's the size of the household? What's their energy requirement? What's the insulation? What's the insulation like? Would they get enough sun? Are there technical notes that needs to inform the actual team that would then go in, close the sale, and then effect the installation of your tool? So that's one thing, is to think overall, what is your process like, and then you develop your data structure accordingly. The other thing you definitely should take into account in a pay-as-you-go model is, okay, well, how will they pay you? And how would you log that against the customer? In our Ghana sanitation marketing system, we recognize that we recognize that financing is a need. So we have taken the step to offer financing. So we basically say, hey, you could either pay cash at this price, or you could pay in 18 easy monthly installments of around $25 a month. So what we've done there then is to say, great, we have taken the risk to give people credit, and we would really, really like to be able to log when they pay us back. So initially that was done manually, but now we have rolling out mobile money. And so to really close the loop on it, we then looking into integration. So we'll grab it from the mobile money, the telecom company, MTN, and then pipe it into Salesforce. And then once you have done it, you really can reduce the touch point that you have. And if there's people behind on their payments, or there's complaints about that, and that can live into Salesforce to attach to that customer account. So it's hard to build this all at once if you are starting out. But one key thing as an architect, you got to think about, okay, where's the future vision is going to be? How do you imagine you'll scale your success one step at a time? And then don't paint yourself in the corner. Just say to yourself, all right, later on, we are going to have mobile money. Later on, people can auto debit, and then plan accordingly. So great question.
Thanks, Gordon. Great. Sorry, we're a little over time. I do have a good question here. So if people can hang on for just 1 second. Last question comes from Mark. I think this one's for you, Scott. What is the best way to test salespeople to know if they're going to work? Like, is there a magic ratio of salary and commissions, and how do you go about calculating that right commission?
Great question. So it sounds like two questions. How do you test salespeople first to see if they're going to work out? Did I hear that correctly?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Mark, I got to tell you, that is the $1 million question. That if you can figure that out, you could have an old industry, begging at your feet. There are lots of things that people try to do with things like psychometrics, and I've been licensed as a psychometric analyst for about 25 years now, and I was taught from the very beginning is there's really no prediction of success of salespeople. You can certainly look at their past. You can see what their patterns have been. You can see, not just from a sales standpoint, but what have they done in their previous jobs? Have they had a job communicating to other people? how long have they been in the jobs they've been in? You know, if it's, you know, fast turnover, slow turnover, that kind of thing. That'll tell you a little bit about their loyalty. I particularly like to ask them about things like, you know, what are the greatest challenges you've ever faced? And, you know, I like to give them some different scenarios and ask them to walk me through it. But, you know, push come to shove, there's really no predictive tool that can tell you exactly if a salesperson is going to make it or not. That's one of the challenges, you know, and it's also one of the challenges for the salesperson, because they're coming in and they're taking a gamble as well, because oftentimes a lot of their income is on a variable basis. So it leads to the second part of your question, which is you know, what is the right combination? I think what you really want to do is look at what does a person earn in their job, an average person they earn in their job when they are working in that area, how much jobs pay, etc. And I think you want to look at also the product you're selling, how you're going to sell it, how many times it can be shown. I remember when we built our insurance company, that was the main thing that we did when we determined how much we would pay salespeople, was how many presentations realistically could they make in a day. We figured it was about 7 to 8. And so then we geared the insurance product accordingly, and then the commissions accordingly. So the people, if they worked hard and just, you know, showed it enough times with a reasonable amount of training, we thought that, you know, they could earn an average income. And for people who worked hard and then also were better than average salesperson, they could make an extraordinary income. So I think the same thing can be applied in, you know, in Zambia or in Nepal or wherever. Is people who go into sales typically go into sales not just because there's no other opportunity, but also because oftentimes they want an extraordinary opportunity. And so my suggestion would be to align on the higher income opportunity for people, so it really attracts better people rather than, you know, underpaying people, you know, because you're afraid they're not going to make it or whatever it might be. You know, don't underpay your people. Pay your people something that's reasonable, something that, you know, is going to, if they just do a good, steady job for you, that is going to keep their bills paid, you know, at least the basic bills. And if they do an extraordinary job for you, then it's really going to add a lot into their coffers, and rightly so.
Great. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap this up, and then I'll follow up with Daniel. I see you have a question. I can follow up with you separately. I think with that, I'll wrap this up. So thank you so much, Scott, Michelle, and Gordon, especially for the ones in Cambodia right now. So great insights. I learned a lot, and I think that's it. Have a good night. Have a good day.
Great. Thanks, Elaine.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, Elaine. Thanks, everyone.